The Big 12 North Pod. There are 16 teams. We cut it into 4. Yesterday we looked at 4 in the South, the 4 in the North, Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, and West Virginia. Let's start with Kansas. They've gotten kind of hot, disappointing year because of all the expectations, but they've now won a couple of games against good people, and let's start with Kansas and Lance Leipold.
Yeah, they've started to play well, and Jalen Daniels has started to look like himself, and all of a sudden everybody's going to hate Jeff Grimes as much as they did at the beginning of the year. But they still look. They've got some tough ones on the way out. But if they can keep rolling, they got to win, these two to get to a bowl game. Maybe they've shaken off their bad luck from earlier in the year. I kind of half expected it to pop up because the game against BYU was so close that, okay, well, it's 17-13, but this is going to be 2017 with 9 seconds left because some weird stuff happened, and it didn't. So, yeah, I'm interested to see how they play down the stretch these last 2 games, especially if they win this week. That game on the 30th here against Baylor is going to be really, really interesting because they'll have a lot on the line for that one.
Yeah, they've been one of the hottest teams in the country, and I think that is going to stick. I don't know if it results in going and beating Colorado or beating Baylor, but I do think they're going to continue to play well. And I think the schedule, obviously, early on was a bit too much, especially when Jalen Daniels was still in very much a recuperation or rehabilitation or just reinvigoration type of mode where clearly he wasn't back to being the guy that we expected. And that's the thing, when you're making predictions, you don't know that Jalen Daniels isn't going to be even 80% for like the first 5 weeks of the season when you're predicting Kansas is going to be third in the Big 12 or whatever. So those are just variables that you don't really have on hand unless you're Lance Leipold. And they didn't shy away from the expectations even then. But I do think that, the first half of the season probably went even worse than they could ever have anticipated, even with Jalen Daniels not quite at 100%, because there was plenty of others coming back that thought that led you to believe that you could go and win more than you did. So they lost a bunch of those games early on, 5 in a row to be exact, after getting that first win. But when you looked at them, they were all in a lot of the cases, all very close games. And so you're just looking at that like, well, damn, if they could just get a little bit of luck, they might actually be right in the thick of this thing, and that's what's happened the last month. They've had a little bit more luck. They've also gone out and taken it like they did against Houston, and they had the K-State, obviously, debacle, but that was right there for the taking as well. So, yeah, I just think it's a good to solid team that had a little bit of bad luck early. It's starting to turn, and Jalen Daniels is playing better, and they're getting wins, and now they're making it very interesting here at the end. I think the Colorado game being at home makes that even more intriguing, and I think they're going to give Colorado plenty to handle this weekend. I'm not predicting an upset, but I do think that it ought to be highly competitive like most Big 12 games are. So this is an opportunity for them to really jump up and make a lot of noise. And, yeah, if they win this game, then they'd have one more to try to win 6, and that'd be a really big deal to get bowl eligible after starting off the season 1-5 to even be in that position. For all the bad talk about Lance Leipold or if he's really got it or not, or about whatever you wanted to pinpoint, they've shut a lot of people up over the last month and could really shut a lot of people up in the next couple of weeks.
I got an interesting part about their schedule. Bear with me here. They lost to Illinois. They're ranked in one poll but not in another, but they've been ranked, right?
Yep.
Has UNLV been ranked at all throughout the year? Did they sneak into the top 20 to 25 range?
I don't remember if they actually have been ranked at any point, but yeah, they were in that conversation.
West Virginia.
No.
TCU.
No.
Arizona State now. Kansas State, when they lost by 2, was 16th. They just beat 17th ranked and 6th ranked Iowa State and BYU, and they're about to play 17th ranked Colorado. They have had a deceiving schedule, but they have a chance to win 3 straight against top 20 teams if they can beat Colorado at home on Saturday afternoon.
UNLV's in this poll right now, so yeah,
I mean, that's a pretty dicey little schedule, but again, not that still what we expected from Kansas, but and they got some close losses, 3 and 4 and 4 and then 2. So maybe they just were a lot better despite what your record says you are.
I think that's the case. I think that's absolutely what happened. And, yeah, UNLV's ranked right now, so that counts. And it's a pretty difficult schedule. I think that was kind of thought to be the case going in. But I also think that some perspectives had that as being a bit of an easier schedule. And, yeah, you just never know. You never know how it shakes out. And so it turned out to be one heck of a ride, and they've had their flat tires and their broken windshields and all that, and they've seemingly repaired most of it, and now they're cruising again, and it's just a matter of to where. But they've got it all in front of them, and I think if, again, they were to make a bowl game somehow, that would be a remarkable turnaround and really something to talk about.
All right, so there we have it with Kansas as a part of the Big 12 North.
And what was most impressive about that win was that it was defensive, and they got the big break on the punt fumble. That was a huge break, and they probably don't win that game without that. I mean, I think that's probably fair to say because that was such a swing, such a massive swing in that game. But they played it tight. The defense kept them in it, and, that's a very encouraging sign because so much is talked about when it comes to the offense, but that was very much a game where they had to grit it out and just make one extra play, and they were able to do that on special teams with a little bit of help from their opponent. But regardless, you'll take that. And that was a great win out in Provo, but it wasn't totally unexpected because we brought it up a couple times last week that, hey, Kansas is hot right now. BYU's not. Better be careful. And not always right, but in that case, you saw the signs in writing.
You could almost tell early on that this thing was going to be a typical BYU game. Not typical. They've won some games going away, but it was going to be Kansas was there, no doubt, and locked in. And then there's Iowa State after back-to-back losses at home against Texas Tech and then at Kansas by 10. They beat Cincinnati, looked good doing it. That game was a little bit touch and go early, but then they kind of separated. Now they're on the road against Utah, 6:30 Saturday night on Fox.
Yeah, Isaac Wilson had some moments in that game last week that showed the potential that he has. So that's going to be more of a challenge for Iowa State maybe than I would have thought of a week ago. But I still think that, the line's about right. Iowa State 7.5. I think they probably even, they cover that plus there. I think they might have shaken off their doldrums a little bit. Of course, you play close games, you're going to lose some close games, and they've done that now. But I do think Iowa State and Rocco Becht, really like watching him play. He's a gamer. They've got some really good skill players. I expect Iowa State to win this one and not be particularly close.
Yeah, I mean, they pulled away in the second half. That was a tight ball game, and they made the most of their opportunities and didn't have any crazy type of game offensively, but just punched it in when they had the opportunity to do so there in the third and fourth quarter, and that took them the way that they needed to go in terms of just getting back on the winning track. So nice win over Cincy. Didn't have to sweat that one too much. I still think there's obviously a lot that they're battling in terms of injuries and just the week-to-week grind, but they're still really well positioned. They unfortunately, with that second loss, took fate out of their own hands, but they're still an outside shot with a couple weeks to go. They're one of those teams that's looking at hey, if chaos were to hit, we could be in Arlington somehow. It's not, like I said, fully in their control, but what is going out and beating Utah and Salt Lake City, and I think they have every reason to believe that they can go and do that, and anything other than that would be a massive disappointment because then you're looking at being, 8-3, which is still a pretty good year, but then you got K-State the week after that, so with 8-4, and I don't even know if 9-3 feels all that great, honestly. So, just based on where you were at the start of the season and having started off 7-0. I'm very curious to see how they travel out there, but I fully expect them to get a win and be in that mix to win, 9 regular season games, if not 10 regular season games. That's still out there for them. And, if chaos breaks loose, you take care of your business, then maybe you get that call to Arlington because Arizona State jumps up and bites Colorado, BYU loses, Arizona State jumps up and bites BYU, right? That's who they're playing this week. And then Colorado gets knocked off by Kansas, and then next thing you know, here you are. And
in this league, who knows?
Yeah, next thing you know, you're right there. So just take care of your business and hope for a little bit of luck. But a lot of stuff still in front of you like it always has been.
The minute you're feeling good in the Big 12 is the minute somebody comes to get you.
Anytime you start feeling like you smell pretty good, then you better watch out because there's teams that are getting hot that were not in good shape, like KU, like Baylor. You've had some that have been up and down, including one we're about to talk about. There was a picture at the end of the game in Morgantown that was damning, and one that I'm sure Ren Baker didn't like, and I know some fans even brought it to my attention, where you saw parts of the stadium that were empty, like a clump of 12 fans. Yeah, one, they're getting their asses kicked. At the same time, it's West Virginia, and they have a very, very good fan base. Man, about the time you think, this is an example, about the time you think you know who they are, they win back-to-back games on the road at Arizona, Cincinnati after losing badly at home against Iowa State and Kansas State.
Well, they're losing games at home now, I mean, like constantly.
In 49-35, second half. It was a very 49-35. This was a 14. It's like the Texas Tech game with Baylor won. It was not that close if you look at the score.
No, and yeah, that last touchdown was kind of,
dude, I mean, forget the last touchdown. The Garrett Green touchdown right before the half. He never got in the end zone.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a very fortunate call that made that a one-score game going into halftime. That should have been a 14-point game, and really Baylor just eventually pulled away the way they were kind of looked like they should have all along, but that kept it closer for a while longer than it probably would have been.
But the reason I keep asking people who are in the know, like Shahan a second ago, and I get the reasoning, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's still there, but Neil Brown's not only losing at home, they're getting curb stomped at home. They're losing bad. And then he floated out the, you should be having a good time. Everybody's got a couple pops in them, right? The kids are out there, should be fun. Well, no, it's not fun to watch your team. It's not they're losing close games at home. The conferences come in here. Iowa State's drilled them at home. Baylor's drilled them at home. They've gotten beaten at home really badly, and that's where you really start to lose people. And look, if not for Baylor's turn, like Dave Aranda can send him here's the toolkit, because he was losing badly at home a lot until very, very recently. And that's the thing I think that drives people up the wall the most. You lose when they're not paying tickets to see you and they're just watching on TV. They'll be mad. You lose when they, take their whole day and sit there. They get really mad. And that was going on at Baylor until Dave Aranda turned it around. Neil Brown has the same problem right now.
They've lost 3 straight at home. They've won 2 games at home all year out of 6. So, yeah, the once mighty Morgantown, I'm sure there's still elements of that, but it's not the fortress that it used to be, the big, bad, haunted house. Same thing with Boone Pickens. That used to be like, oh, man, got to go Stillwater. Who cares now? I mean, I'm sure that once they get good again, it'll be that way, but this year it hasn't been that way for either one of those programs. And even Kansas went and said, Provo what? Like, we'll just roll into there on Saturday night. We don't give a damn. So, yeah, I mean, this league is crazy. But, typically programs like West Virginia have had strong home field, and that's not the case. And I think that just kind of plays into the overall narrative sort of going on right now. I mentioned that, not to take away from West Virginia, but that Garrett Green touchdown was very questionable. I mean, very questionable. And if you had a higher-level broadcast with different cameras, might not have scored that touchdown because you actually had a real pylon cam. Regardless, he gets the credit for that, and they keep the game close. But eventually Baylor pulled away, and I don't think there was any doubt they were the better team on Saturday. I don't think there was any question whatsoever, even if you're the most diehard Mountaineer fan in the world. There's no way you looked at that game and go, yeah, West Virginia should have beaten them. They were a bit. Absolutely no way you could have seen that. So I just don't know what you're really holding on to right now. That's all that great. You're not winning home games. All the big home games that you get excited for, you get pumped up for, they put the cool promotions on it. You've lost all of those games. Garrett Green comes back from injury after you got to see the little bit of the youngster in Marchiol, and he's fine. He had a pretty good game against Baylor.
Hold on just a second. You hear what he just said? He's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good quarterback, but he's not great. I mean, he's not, and so he's cool. He's fine. He's if you want to play 500-ish football, then hey, you're gonna get that done. But it's not like anything that's exciting. It's not like, oh man, Garrett Green's back, guys. Like now we're gonna go on a run. It's like, oh, all right, cool, I guess. I don't know. I really liked watching Nico, though. Like, that's what I'm talking about. And so there's not even that element now. So you're kind of just back to Garrett Green, which a lot of people have already just sort of gotten over that. There's just not a lot of positives, point being. And I do think if you're looking for some, you should beat UCF at home this weekend, and you should get bowl eligible. And I do think it's kind of harder to fire guys if they're getting bowl eligible and making the postseason. Now, if you're a program that's you just bare minimum do that every week, then that could be something that doesn't matter as much in the long run. But I do think it is something that matters. That is something that is still out there in front of them, and I would anticipate them doing that at home against UCF this weekend. But boy, oh boy, if they don't, they drop another home game and they lose to UCF, then you suddenly get into a situation where you've got to win your last game to get bowl eligible, and that's at Texas Tech. I mean, I just don't know. Like you're skating on thin ice right now if you're Neil Brown.
No, you mentioned it. You took away a little bit of what I was going to mention. They haven't played a lot lately, but they lost that game to Pittsburgh. It's still one hell of a rivalry. They've played like 60-something times, even though they had not played until the last 3 seasons for a decade. And then, of course, the Penn State series, which is heavily favored towards Penn State, a game that had all sorts of, lead up, and they get smoked in that game. So those are 2 games where there was at least hope in the fan base that maybe they could win one of those 2. But, yeah, they're losing at home. West Virginia fans are great. I'm not into, like, firing coaches, but you just wonder how things shake out with just a couple of weeks left in the season. West Virginia now is 5-5. They just need to win a game. As you said, Craig, to get to a bowl game. And there's no reason why they can't win at home against UCF. And then again, the game on the road against Texas Tech might be a little bit more interesting. UCF's another team, although not in the pod, where, you thought they were dead and buried. Then they won a game, and then, you cannot say, okay, I know who that is. Is there anybody in the Big 12 right now? I think Arizona State and Colorado would be 1 and 2 that you know exactly their personality and who they are.
No. I mean, who their personality is, I guess Colorado, what you said, but outside of, a couple, no, because they're not. Nobody's been
Some
super
are building
consistent.
that because remember we would talk about this whether we're at the home games or doing pregame or postgame. Is Baylor didn't have an identity, right?
Yeah.
They didn't have an identity. And look, you now kind of see what they have, an identity. We're going to have John Kurtz on in the 5 o'clock hour. Do you want to wait for K-State for that one, get to Pat Smith, or you want to do K-State right now?
Let's do K-State.
All right, K-State, we know Chris Klieman. It's been a tough stretch. They're still a good football team. It's like they haven't just forgotten how to win. But because of what was in front of them, losing that game at Houston gave them no room for error. After losing and getting beat up earlier in the year by BYU, and then they turn around. Arizona State goes in there. It was 24-0. It could have been worse, and punched them right in the nose and did to them what K-State, when they're really good and have their identity, do to other people.
Yeah, they absolutely let K-State just come right at them in that first half, and defensively they locked down on them in the second half, but really couldn't move the ball enough to get back in the game. I mean, they made it close. It was 24-14, but yeah, that's why it was so disappointing that they lost that game, and that's not the first time it's happened to them this year. Where they kind of got taken off their off their feet. Obviously, BYU did it to them, but yeah, they're Kansas State to me is a team who clearly is a year away. Because, if you were there, you wouldn't lose a game to Houston. Now, ASU and BYU are 2 of the top teams in the conference. That's fine, but you wouldn't lose like they have the last couple, lose that game to Houston. If you were really ready, those games you would take care of, and they're just not there yet. I think they win this week against Cincinnati, but next week against Farmageddon, that is going to be a doozy.
Well, it was a terrible showing on offense in the first half. I mean, Avery Johnson's basically throwing a pick as soon as the game starts. So that was a nice tone setter. And then you turn the ball over twice on downs. You have a fumble, the interception that I mentioned, and then a punt. So you had interception right as the game starts, turnover on downs, punt, fumble, turnover on downs. That is your first half offensive drive. So, yeah, that's not going to win many games. And Arizona State able to take advantage and move the football and put points on the board, just dug way too much of a hole, then came out in the second half, added to it with another field goal, and 24 was all that they needed. And so for Kansas State, you just have to start better. You have to play a bit cleaner. Avery Johnson, has to protect the football. The little things, I think, are the things that are kind of getting away from them a little bit, and certainly hurt them the other night. So I think they're fine in terms of, like, big picture worries. I don't think there's anything to be overly concerned about, especially since they've kind of cleared up the questions about Chris Kleiman and his just answers the other night. And so now that that's been put to the side and there's no impending resignation or any big thing down the pipeline, they just need to settle in and just play better football. I think that's the big thing. I do think that they probably got a bit too much hype for this year. So I'll be guilty as that, on that, like everybody else who pumped them up. But they were still right there towards the top of the standings, so it wasn't too overdone. They just, didn't play well the other night, and they haven't played well during a stretch of games now. And I think that the back-to-back losses are certainly extremely unexpected, especially at Houston and Arizona State in particular. Like, there's just no way on the preseason schedule you would have circled probably either one of those games as losses, much less as back-to-back losses. So they're going through it right now, but they're still a solid team, and I do expect them to bounce back at home and beat Cincinnati and send their seniors out the way they wanted to the other night with a big win.
All right, what's the game, Craig and Paul, that you play? Paul, we've done that media group. Craig wasn't there when Scott Drew was the top seed.
Oh, yeah, the Connect Four?
Isn't that what the Big 12 is?
Yeah, I mean, you
drop it, and sometimes it stops, and sometimes it goes down 3 or 4 slots. That's just me. That's my old man. Look, there's a duck moment. That's who they remind me of. They're just up topsy-turvy. In K-State, like, you lose a game, you could drop like 5 spots. You win a game, you could vault over 3 or 4 teams. We've seen that happen. But still, they're dead in the water as far. Can they get to the Big 12 championship game? There are all of the teams at 4-3. Crazy. Baylor even, Kansas State, TCU, Tech, West Virginia, who mathematically are not dead in the water. Now, that could happen and be over with everybody other than BYU and Colorado after this weekend coming up.